The Grounded Reason podcast. Not many fans of the Ajit Pai here.
What if he was one of our subscribers?
Hey, this is Dennis, and welcome to yet another episode of the Grounded Reason podcast, where we... I'm not going to bullshit you. Today, we're just going to bitch about Ajit Pai.
Yeah. I think it's time.
Okay. So, I mean, and this actually... No, actually, this is actually bitching about Ajit Pai, too. But I wanted to get to... it's more about Verizon and Comcast. Those that have listened to the podcast, if you're listening for the first time, we discussed net neutrality. Well, at least it's been a while since it's come up on an episode, but we've done full shows on net neutrality in the past. Cut to the chase. Basically, it's a FCC regulation where they basically say your ISP can't block or throttle or give preferential treatment to content. So they can't throttle Netflix or Amazon Video because it's cutting into their cable company profits, or they can't throttle my website that teaches people how to cut the cord.
Right.
So what Ajit Pai, the chairman of the FCC, has been like guns a-blazing trying to get rid of this rule.
Yeah, and it's gotten a little insidious recently because he's kind of gone dark on it, right? Like he like after all the comments finally closed out, and it was record level comments.
Yep.
By like leaps and bounds.
Right.
Like the number 2 most comments on any rule ever made was the last time this topic came up.
Right. Yeah. Because the first time when they actually put the rules in place in 2015,
there were several million, I think.
Yeah, it was like 4 million. And I think this time they were like over 10, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, even if you take out a lot of the bots, I think they were close.
Yeah, because there were 600,000 or 700,000, depending on what numbers you look at.
Yeah, well, it depends. There's a couple like injections of bots into the process too. There's also, I was reading on I want to say it was either TechDirt or Ars Technica, I can't remember now. But some internet detective figured out, like, he's tracking all these dead people that like put comments on like against net neutrality. Like,
wait a second. Ghosts need internet too.
Wow. Yeah. Well, he took pictures of like the address that they put there of like some like abandoned shack. Like, yeah, like went like hardcore like Columbo on a lot of these fake FCC comments.
Job.
I know, seriously. But anyway, so what we're going to talk about today, one of the things we're going to talk about today is Verizon and Comcast are now lobbying the FCC, get this, to usurp states' rights and basically say that a state can't make any net neutrality rules on their own once Ajit Pai like gets rid of the federal regulations.
I'm pretty sure the Constitution has something about all other rights being reserved for the state.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, I
think they want to play.
It's been a while.
Check out this irony. They want to. I think that Comcast and Verizon are trying to convince, like, Republican hardcore conservative Ajit Pai to go the whole interstate commerce route.
Yeah.
Which is really ironic.
Do it. That's the only way you could do it.
Because that's how like all that New Deal legislation pretty much went into effect.
So inside baseball, like for like Beltway stuff, is that basically every bit of, quote unquote overreach that's been done domestically by the federal government, with the exception of whatever's come out of Homeland Security, has been like under the interstate commerce clause.
Yeah, and typically Republicans hate it, libertarians hate it, because it's basically
commerce can be defined as almost anything,
right? Because back when they wrote, there's a clause in the Constitution, but basically just says that the federal government has the right to regulate interstate commerce, and they've taken that
one sentence,
right,
and blown it out to be a lot.
Yeah, because back when you would have to ride like in a horse and buggy for, days to get across your state line in some situations. There wasn't much interstate commerce.
No, when they were talking about it, it was a person from Virginia with a horse and a cart dragging it across the line to Maryland full of apples.
Which was probably that's probably an oversimplification. I'm assuming what they probably had in mind is like goods on a boat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like stuff that's
down
actually
the river. Right. Yeah.
Right.
But I am oversimplifying.
Right. But that's probably where they were with it. But then, a boat, the equivalent of moving goods these days. I mean, we can do what a boat did every hour.
They did not imagine
right.
deregulated modern trucking or air freight or
right.
The internet or and on and on and on, right? Like, so like there is a need to use some sort of constitutional framework to describe all these things. The grand irony that I don't object necessarily to the interpretation that the federal government has generally used.
Sometimes the speed limit thing's a little crazy, but okay.
There's stuff, right? But generally speaking, you gotta use something from the Constitution for it. But the grand irony that Dennis is pointing to is that normally the people that push back against this are the Ajit Pais of the world. Right. And like he's now getting lobbied, and
it's by Verizon and Comcast. So he's going to be like, okay.
Well, he's a former Verizon attorney.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, like they're taking him out to all of the nicest restaurants in DC and talking to him about the Constitution all night long.
Yeah, and this is really ballsy, I think,
it really is.
Of Comcast and Verizon. Not only because it's kind of just, let's completely throw like decades of Republican ideology down the toilet so we can get this law enacted. But also, what happens if this flips at some point and it's written to precedent that the FCC now has some type of like policy precedent to set rules over top of states when it comes to internet broadband?
Yeah.
When the pendulum swings back, that's not going to be a great policy precedent for, these oligopoly ISPs.
No, and the other thing is that it seems to me as an easily like defeated strategy, right? Like there are the courts, right? And the courts would I don't know. Courts, you never know what they're going to decide until they decide it, right?
Yeah.
But with the way the Supreme Court is laid out right now, I mean, with the number of conservative judges that would disagree with on ideological lines, and the number of liberal judges that would disagree with this on, consumer protection grounds.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not inconceivable to think of this as a unanimous rejection of this policy.
Yeah, because majority of conservative judges are like principled conservative judges that don't change their mind on a whim because liberals don't like something. They have like a set of principles that they stick to typically.
Yep.
So I agree. I don't really see how it's going to get through many court challenges because there's
and I'm thinking like Supreme Court level, but it could very easily get stricken down at whatever circuit courts and so on. Like I will admit now that I do not know how this would go up through the courts.
And I don't disagree. Verizon wrote in a white paper, they said, allowing every state and locality to chart its own course regulating broadband is a recipe for disaster. It would impose localized and likely inconsistent burdens on an inherently interstate service. Fine.
Absolutely.
Then
but I could tell you for a fact.
That's why I'm for regulating it at the FCC and keeping net neutrality in place.
I would agree with them, but I will tell you per fact that the United States has a grand history of this because we do it in banking.
Right.
Every
and insurance.
State has their own banking regulation regime.
Right.
Like, so it's a mess. And health, but it's not uncommon.
Everything is kind of,
it's the nature of our system.
Yeah.
because all rights not
because of the 10th
specifically
Amendment, yeah.
called out are reserved by the states.
Exactly. That's how it's built. So, just an interesting, I thought a little interesting twist there from ISPs, and we'll see what Ajit. I don't think there was a comment yet from Ajit on
Pretty
this.
ballsy.
Yeah,
And-
but knowing Ajit and it's Verizon and Comcast, I can't see it not happening, or at least some type of compromise to where they can get what they want out of this.
Oh, I mean, the only thing I can think of that would keep this, because he's deep in their pocket, right? Like from everything, at least I've seen so far, like his actions, not anything, nefarious. I haven't seen any money exchange hands or anything, but just based on policy discussions that he's had, he's deep in their pocket. So I would think the only reason he wouldn't go along with this is he goes, I'll handle it at the federal level, and we'll just try and scare them away from doing it at the state level. It's not a good idea for us to try and, push it.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see, because he's really big on, I think, what was the quote that he had? Taking a weed whacker to all the regulations. So I just think it's kind of gonna like leave a bad taste in his mouth to actually have to actually put things in place at the state level, or to like usurp state power. But I don't know, who knows? He is doing, however, a number, getting to our next topic, doing a huge number on your local news.
Wow, this stuff is crazy.
Yeah, and it's kind of it goes back to the spring. There are at the FCC, there are a bunch of rules in place, and they were put in place a long time ago, decades ago, to ensure that the news, your local news, is local, relevant to your area that you're in, and representative of the people serviced by the news in that area.
And it was done as a consumer protection because, like, they saw the market getting gobbled up by larger entities, and they wanted to make sure that local news, which is a public service of sorts,
right? And that's the key right there.
Exists.
Is the airwaves. Not many
they're
people.
Public good.
They are. They're owned by the technically they're
owned by the federal government.
Well, they're owned by the public. It's the
which
public.
Is effectively the same.
It's
thing.
us. Yeah, we the people. But that's the whole point was. Yeah, sure, we can let these networks use the public airwaves in exchange for some amount of time of giving local news or giving news.
It's like an hour an evening type thing.
Yeah, I think it is, because you have to do a half hour in the evening and then a half hour at night or something along those lines.
That, yeah.
But so they put these rules in place, and the rules in question are essentially. No media company can reach more than 39% of national U.S. TV households. So, the media company, you just can't go and just expand your reach. And the reason for that is fairly obvious. You don't want, one national opinion on every local news channel.
For obvious reasons, right? Like if you control the airwaves, you largely control the discourse. Right. And that has big downsides.
Yeah. So, and another one is a company is required to have a local news studio in the DMA, or the designated marketing area of the channel they own. So, and there's 210 designated marketing areas in the country. Just so you know, I mean, I think the smallest it consists of like 60,000 people.
Yeah.
While like the largest is probably New York or LA and consists of like tens of millions of people.
I think it's New York because LA is geographically so large.
That's true. Yeah.
I think it's
probably
actually,
New York, right?
Yeah. But so just so everyone knows, that's it's basically just a designation demographers use and regulators use for saying, like, a city and its suburbs, right?
Yeah.
Like, so in the case of Baltimore and Washington, they bleed into one.
Well, no, they're actually separate DMAs.
Are they?
Yeah, they're
Because in MSA, they're the same.
They are. Yeah, MSAs are bigger, or not? They're less MSAs.
Okay, gotcha. So the MSAs are actually.
That's why there's like a Fox 5 in DC and then a Fox 45 in Baltimore.
Oh, okay. So I stand corrected. They actually are. So it still would be Baltimore and its suburbs. It's just not Baltimore, Washington,
Correct.
and its suburbs.
Correct.
So you're talking 2 million people instead of 8 million.
Yeah, well, Washington's pretty big because it grabs like an inside here, but
Northern Virginia,
and it goes all the way up to Hagerstown. It grabs the whole like west side of the state.
Fairfax,
right?
And,
So yeah, it's actually that's like one of the top. I think it's the top 10. But okay, well, here it is. The biggest ones are New York at 7 million, LA's number 2, and then Chicago is 3, and
Houston.
Right, and then the smallest is Glendive, where who the hell knows where that is? And I was wrong. It's 4,000 people in that one.
Like New Jersey or something.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Sorry, Glendive, if you're out there.
Sorry,
I don't know where you are.
We just lost.
Bye, Glendive listener. Apologies. So that is the second one. The third rule is a media company can only own 2 TV stations in a DMA as long as one of the stations isn't ranked in the top 4.
Okay.
Like top 4 stations in that area. So, I mean, if you're, if you're ABC, NBC, or Fox, you're probably going to be the largest or top one. Unless, LA, I think, actually has multiple Foxes and multiple, stations. So
we were just out there, but I don't remember.
Yeah, who knows? But they only like you can only, if you're one of those guys, you're probably only going to be allowed to own one station in that area. All right. So, and as we said, like the reasons these rules are put in place is to ensure diversity in local news coverage.
Yep.
It ensures, and it's a way of ensuring competition, and that's why the big companies haven't bought up all local affiliates.
Yeah, they're prohibited.
Well, yeah, because they typically own like they own a New York, they own your LA, they own a Chicago, Miami, maybe. Yep. They go down, but once they hit 38%, they aren't allowed to buy up any more channels. So that's why those major companies probably only hold 7 to 10 different channels, and it's usually the largest areas, the largest DMAs. So back in the spring, there is a media company called Sinclair Broadcast Corporation.
Yeah.
And they, at the beginning of the year, they owned 38%. They had a reach of 38%. They could reach 38% of U.S. households. So back in spring, Ajit Pai reinstated a rule that we got rid of last year called the UHF discount rule. Now, this rule was because I don't know, like if anyone remembers analog television, like before
I remember
before it went digital out there.
But I'm old.
But like UHF, which means basically any channel above channel 13, used to be fairly terrible when it came to reception.
Yeah,
you were lucky if you could get 1 or 2 UHF channels. And I lived in Baltimore, which is a pretty big city, and I think I could get like maybe 2 or 3 UHF channels. And that was just the nature of the technology. So they created something called and actually Ronald Reagan, I think, put this in place. Ronald Reagan actually put the national the 38%, the 39% rule. At the time that was 25%, and his big fear was he didn't want the conservative, like he didn't want the liberal voice to like overwhelm the airwaves. Well, and so he put a rule. His FCC actually put a rule in place to kind of like leave it at 25% nationally. Which, and I agree with that. I agree that you don't want one voice like completely taking over the airwaves.
Think about it, right? Like the concern is that the larger localities would gobble up all the smaller ones because they've got bigger hands.
Well, correct.
Like poker hands, right? Like they've got more chips, so they can go buy up all these little localities, and they control more and more of the discourse.
Correct. So, but so this discount rule, this UHF discount rule, what this was is since you had these low technology stations, it wasn't really fair that like if their geographic reach was 1 million odds are 1 million people in that area weren't able to get the station just due to UHF technology. So they did something called the UHF discount, where UHF channels counted at 50% of the audience.
Oh, okay.
So as digital came out, and the Wheeler FCC basically said this is an antiquated rule.
Yeah.
Because UHF now is actually, it's better. It's better in digital, and that's just the nature of the UHF signal. It has actually more power to it, so it's easier for antennas to pick that up. And a lot of antennas these days actually do much better with UHF than they do VHF. If you've been on my blog and you go to the antenna page, it explains
we did
all
an
this.
episode on
we
that.
did. We did do an episode on that.
I think it was like the 5th or 6th one.
So this rule went out last year. Well, Ajit Pai, this happened actually back in April, basically reinstated the rule. Just said, yep, it counts, which was kind of at the time, like when he did it.
Yep.
You're like, what? Because it didn't make any sense. It's not really technologically applicable these days.
Right.
Well, lo and behold, weeks later, Sinclair Broadcast announced the plans to buy like 42 stations from Tribune Media.
Uh-huh.
And if you recall, how could they buy them? They're 38%. Well, with the UHF discount rule,
they can get up to 50.
Well, no, they get, actually the math works out where the cap now, like depending on where you are geographically, you can actually own 75% of the country. You can have a 75% reach now with the UHF discount rule.
Yeah, because Tribune's huge.
Well, Sinclair owned about 170 channels, but they weren't covered. They didn't have they weren't in every major market. Tribune is in a lot of LA's and a lot of Chicago, and that's what they did. They bought a station in New York, they bought a station in LA, they bought a station in Chicago, at 42 in all. So they now with the cap 75. With that purchase, with the plan to purchase, because it's going to be approved, but it's got to go through all the hurdles. 72% of households.
Wow, that's insane.
Off of that rule, just that one rule, where they could pretty much create some like fuzzy math there, and it's a loophole. I mean, it's a loophole that they got rid of, and Ajit Pai reinstated.
And that's what I was talking about when when he first stepped into the role as chairman, like the stuff he was doing regarding net neutrality was so blatant that everybody was watching it, and it started to worry me. And we talked about it at one point, that like he had just kind of gone quiet for a while, and I was wondering, like, okay, is he weirded out by like how upset people are, in the comments and so on, because it was just so many. But then I started to, tinfoil hat went on, that like he's doing something else, and this is it. This is
well, I mean, and it's kind of like, it's funny too, because he swears that this is for like competition and whatever. Because I think the one of the quotes, actually, there's two other prongs to this, so let me go through. So I said earlier, there's 210 DMAs, areas. Now, Sinclair, according to there's like an article in Bloomberg. Okay. They're going to own around 230 stations. Now, I think that's because there was also an announcement, because the math doesn't work out. It's like 170 plus 42 is like what? Like 212, something like that?
Yeah.
Announced that I think they bought some more stations too, like during this whole process, because the total number now is up to like 230 something. And with 230 stations, you can imagine that's quite an investment into local news rooms, because you have to keep a studio in each DMA that you're in. So the Tuesday before Halloween, Ajit Pai axed the local newsroom requirement.
It's unbelievable. Which does away with the whole intent of having local news.
Yeah, like if you get rid of that requirement, what stops a company from pretty much just having like one, like why not make it like CNN and you just show
it's
that
it's a national broadcast at that point. Yeah. It's absolutely right. I mean, and it's infuriating. Like when I sent you the article, like I read it and was like gobsmacked. Like I couldn't believe how blatant it was.
Yeah, like I heard like with the thing that was going on with the Sinclair and Tribune deal because of the discount. When I heard the the local, because that's my thought was Tribune would probably sell off some stations because it's just not tenable to like kind of
staff that.
Well, yeah, and to keep up with all the rules. Because there's also the like, which I'll get to in a second, like the top rule where you can only have one station in the top 4. Like you can have 2, or unless you own a top 4 station, then you can only have 1. Right. I was like looking at that, and I was looking at the local newsroom thing, and just the cost associated with that, and thinking that they would definitely do some sell off, and their footprint wouldn't be like 72 is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah,
and I thought it might be above like 39. They might get up to like close to 50. I had no idea that like I did not expect Pai to just axe the local newsroom requirement, which could completely destroy your local news coverage in your area, or it could not. They could have like the appearance of local news where it's really just kind of being manufactured like what's that radio station where they don't really even have any DJs? It's kind of automated. Jack FM. The Jack FM of news where it's just kind of like, it's just shelled out. It appears like it's local, but it's not.
Yeah. I mean, it's people in wherever, let's just make it somewhere far away. People in LA reporting on what they've read on the internet about what's going on in Baltimore. Right. It's not people in Baltimore going out and seeing what's happening in Baltimore.
Yeah, and I know people are probably,
as an example,
people are probably saying, well, there's going to be competition because you're going to have other people maintaining newsrooms. Like, well, if they get rid of the local newsroom rule, what's going to stop like other companies with deep pockets from going in and buying up local affiliates and doing the same thing? Because it's going to be more cost effective to run like less newsrooms.
Yeah, the only thing that I think you could argue, right? Like if you're talking like, because there's 2 points, right? Like one is competition around a good or service, right? Like that's one point, and the other is like the use of a public good for the broader.
True.
Like,
because this really isn't. This shouldn't be an economic discussion. No, it shouldn't. You're right. Because it's not. It's the whole point of this is so people can have local, diverse
discourse, right?
Relative news, like news relative to your area, by people in your area, with reporters reporting in your area.
Yeah,
that's the whole point of it.
Let's say like the headquarters for Sinclair was in Baltimore.
It's actually in Hunt Valley. It's in Maryland.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that close.
Yeah.
So it's in Hunt Valley,
which is Maryland, literally 30 minutes up the road.
Not very far away.
Up one road, like you can. Yeah, it's up 83.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're reporting on stories in Iowa, right? Like they don't know anything about Iowa, right? Like there's no way they understand the local color of the community there, right? Like they don't understand, like, the concerns of the people in that community. Or Colorado or California, and just on and on and on, right? Like they just don't. And that's the whole virtue of saying, hey, like we as the people will, the populace will give this over to these companies to provide this service. Like we, in olden times, right? Like it was basically, the king, right? Like, go back a long ways. It would grant a monopoly on a certain service for the purposes of the state. Right. And that's what this is, right? Like that's what it has been for the last 70 years or 60 years. Right. And so to see this get reduced to just like a good deal for a company merger, it really bothers me.
No, it's exactly what happened to the internet space, or kind of not really a different path, but same outcome. Where you're going to have, I can easily see this. There's no way a local affiliate isn't going to say yes, or at least the owners of that local affiliate they're not going to, when Fox or CBS, parent company rolls into town and jumps a big bunch of money in their lap.
Yeah, they're going to pay them 3 times market.
Right.
Just to get it, right? Like, because it's a monopoly in that local area.
Right.
Right? Like, and once you have that, you can set pricing. Right? Like anyone who wants to do local advertising now has to pay rates of whatever they set.
Right.
Because they're the local monopolist.
Yeah. I mean, and you also get into the whole, like, the CBS affiliate. There's no competition from Fox to buy it.
No.
Because it's the CBS affiliate. So, like, the CBS parent company is going to get dibs on that because the synergy is going to be there. So,
I mean, like, here's what. So there's 2 concerns that I have, right? Like, again, different paths on the concerns. The one is like the short term, and by that I mean the next 5 to 10 years of like I keep using the word, but like the public discourse really being eroded, right? Like, I really think that's a legitimate concern.
Well, it's already happening.
Yeah, of course.
And this is just going to make it worse. I mean, because local news is really the only place where you do get diversity right now.
People hear about like the, local chairman of the commerce, like, who's doing whatever local scandal or whatever.
And it's an institution that still has the trust of the people.
Yeah.
Like, people, if you ask them about their local news, they're typically like, yeah, like the approval rating for local news is great.
Very high.
Ask them about cable news and everyone's like, screw those guys. Right? Yeah. Like, because it's like you have like, okay, this is kind of false equivalence, but you have your Fox View, which is actually kind of gone kind of crazier than I've ever thought they would be.
They've jumped the shark.
Yeah. If you listen during the day, it's like not the 3 Yahoos in the morning.
No, but like the normal.
But the normal news, it's news. But then, like, once that like 5 or 6 o'clock hour hits.
Oh yeah, their peak hours, they're right into full. There's no news; it's all commentary.
Yeah, and it's gone like crazy now, and that's why I say it's not fair anymore. I think to put MSNBC and Fox News on the same level, because Fox News is kind of almost like into like InfoWars territory.
You're really close.
And they're not that bad, but they're headed down that road. Where MSNBC, granted, very left leaning.
Yeah.
And
but they cite sources, right? Like
they cite sources, and yes, it is slanted. I'm not saying that they're like completely on the up and up when it comes to like being non-biased. No. There's definitely a bias there, but it's not to the level of Fox News.
When they do commentary, they're as biased as anyone.
Right.
When they report news, they cite sources and so on.
Yeah.
They try and do double verification and so on, and which is what journalism's supposed to be about.
Right.
So like that's my first concern.
But and then you have CNN, and who knows what the hell they do.
I don't know. Holograms.
I don't know. Sure.
So no, seriously, they do holograms. It's really
oh yeah,
obnoxious.
I've seen that.
I did horrible.
Now, I saw a picture of Wolf Blitzer in a wolf suit for Halloween. Was that real, or was that like it was photoshopped? I hope it's real. I hope it's real.
Yeah, that'd be great. So that's my first concern, is like the public discourse. The other is that I think the good and service we're talking about here, right? That is local news. The moment you do away with or start to do away with like local news rooms, you've now made it a national service, and you've completely dissipated the value of it, right?
Yep.
Like, and people will stop watching. Now it'll take time, but people will stop watching. And that means we have, as a society, lost something valuable. Like a service that was provided to us that was valuable will just cease to be, or be cut back so badly that some areas will not ever have a local television presence.
Right.
And that's like really, I mean, like the big ones, they're always going to have a local presence of some sort.
Right. Yeah. But that's probably where they're going to base the operations out of. I can completely see them just
put it in the top 5 areas, and that's it.
Right. No, but I know, because people are saying, well, yeah, what about the last rule? The
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's the top. You can only own one in the top 4. Well, Pai announced this November meeting that they're going to be looking at getting rid of that thing too. So I think they're still going to leave it to where you can only have 2 in a DMA, but it doesn't really matter if you're in the top 4 anymore, which is really kind of ugly when you think about it, because you can have the top 1 and 2 station you could own the entire market. You can own the entire local market, because you might have 10 stations, but the top 2 could own like 99% of the market share.
You cut this
or the viewership.
You cut this if you want, but that man is a herpy on the asshole of democracy.
A harpy?
Herpy.
Oh, sorry.
Herpy. He's an anal wart.
He's one herpy.
He's one.
I've never
herpy.
heard about that in the singular.
Yeah.
You ever go?
He's a herpy.
Doctor, I have herpy.
On the anus of democracy. Quote. God, man. I mean, like, who in their right mind can put their head on their pillow at night with this kind of stuff?
Because I used to say that I think that he actually thinks that he's like fighting on the side of good, but I don't even know anymore.
I don't think so.
I don't know. I don't know how you could think this is a great idea. I think he just sees like mergers and acquisitions. Like every time he looks at policy, he's like, how do we make more mergers and acquisitions? Because those seem to be doing a bang up job for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, the consolidation of capital.
I mean, come on, look at all the great stuff that's happening. Look at how well the banking sector has treated the people since they allowed the consolidation. Look at how ISPs have done. Mergers and acquisitions are great. Insurance companies, fantastic. These are all great places where we've had lots of mergers and acquisitions.
I don't want to exaggerate, but this is not an exaggeration. Since the common, starting point of what we think of as capitalism, right? 1776 with the publishing of The Wealth of Nations. That's when we really started to think of it.
Oh, like Adam Smith.
Adam Smith, yeah. Since then, literally, people have been pointing to the consolidation of capital as the Achilles heel to capitalism.
Well, I'm telling you,
it is the one problem we have to, and things like the Sherman Antitrust Act and the things that are done Glass-Steagall and so on have been the one thing that has protected us against that inherent problem in the system.
Because otherwise, I read today, and this is a little bit of an aside, Disney's in talks with 21st Century Fox to buy them.
Okay, so I'm going to go back on everything I just said. I want the X-Men, in the Marvel universe.
Yeah, I agree there.
I want the X-Men in the Marvel universe.
Everything else, though.
I will literally, I'll die on that hill, Dennis. I'm okay with that.
No, but I saw this and I'm like, I have the feeling now that like in the if this was poker, and this is the final table of the World Series of capitalism. Like right now, you've got like the last 12 companies. What company is going to walk home with the entire U.S. economy?
Yeah,
let's see.
That's really what it comes down to, right? Like, and here's the thing: you get the U.S. economy. That's 25% of the global economy.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and so I mean, this Peckerwood is fucking going out of his way to make things worse, and I don't get it. I'm okay.
He's a douche canoe.
He is, man. I am totally okay with ad hominem.
It's to that point now, because I've given all. I mean, like we've had like almost 80 episodes now, and we've probably talked about a third of them, and we've gone through every intellectual discourse.
He's not listening
on why it's terrible and why all these things are terrible. And it's just to the point now where I'm just gonna I'm like Donald Trump watching Fox News, just screaming at the television. Yeah, that's where I am right now.
He should go shit in his hat. Like, fuck that guy, right? Like, it's just terrible. I mean, like, you think about it and you go, oh, great, local news is fucked. Okay, that's wonderful.
Right.
Oh, the internet, the other thing I would use to get information. Oh, you're gonna fuck that terrible up? Yeah, great.
Oh, and the thing is like when he decided to say we don't need this rule anymore with the top 4 thing where you can only have one if you're in the top 4, he he does this all the time where he like miscategorizes things. And he said, when they made these rules, there weren't things like Facebook and Google. And I'm like, wait. Those are platforms. Like those aren't.
No.
Like I can go. All the news organizations in the country can put content on Facebook. There's it's a competitive content market. The problem with Facebook, because I know right now they're in trouble because of the Russian hacking. The problem with Facebook and Google is more on how their advertisements are shown.
Yes.
That's the problem. The problem is the little sponsored at the top isn't enough, I don't think.
No.
People need to know that they're reading something that someone is paying for them so you read it.
Right.
People need to know that. And if that was more obvious, I think we could solve half the problem that we're having right now with Facebook and Twitter and Google. To sit there and say, to treat Facebook and Google like a news station is absurd.
Well, they're not creating content.
No.
That's the bottom line. Right? And the news stations the newspapers are, right? Like they are creating content. And so they are inherently different.
Yeah, Facebook is an aggregator. Of content. It's a platform. It is a content platform.
It's effectively an advertising company.
It is.
Right?
It is.
And so what it does, you're exactly right. It's a media company.
It's a medium to put media in.
It consolidates all of this content and distributes it very, very efficiently. And it actually, this is, all right, I'm going to get on my soapbox for a second about Facebook in particular, but Google also. They take advantage, and I know that has pejorative sense to it, but whatever.
They do.
They take advantage of a inherent human flaw, which is we love to confirm our own biases.
Yep.
Right? So whatever you saw yesterday and you liked, you're going to see more of it today, buddy. Right? And more, and I'm going to compound it. And whatever you liked yesterday, I'm going to give you twice as much of that. Right? And so you're not getting a diversity of thought. Right? That is the inherent problem with those platforms.
Yeah.
Right?
And, we're wired to be interested in things that if something is new or scary or outside the norm, we're wired to pay attention to it.
The amygdala trips, and all of a sudden you go, saber-tooth tiger.
Exactly. Right. So it's kind of not.
Hillary has a server in her basement.
Yeah.
Shit.
Right. It's not fair because we're wired to just sit there and consume that stuff because if it's unusual or you'll grab right onto it, or if it's something that's why lies are more appealing than the truth typically, because the truth is typically boring. The
truth of most things when something stupid happens, right, or unusual happens, it's typically incompetence that caused it.
Correct.
Not grand conspiracy.
No, it rarely is that grand conspiracy.
And history has borne that out.
Mm-hmm.
It's more accident, happenstance, things like that. There are conspiracies. Don't get me wrong.
No, yeah.
But they typically fail, right? They're typically
because we can't keep secrets. People are really bad at keeping secrets typically.
Yeah. There's a hell of a lot more fiascos out there than there are Da Vinci codes.
Yes.
Right? That's just the way the world is. So, again, if you're shoveling people information based on, oh, I liked that, so I probably will like this, it means, that's great for books that I want to read.
Right.
Right? Because I'm just entertaining myself and so on, right? And even that has limitations on how healthy it is.
News shouldn't be choose your own adventure.
No. No, there is a place for an editorial pen in news, right?
Right.
And I never really thought I would be the guy saying that until 2016.
There's lots of things the news is like the Onion. I mean, I can't tell sometimes. Like I always need to, like before you see an Onion headline and you would like, oh, that's obviously some satirical piece from the Onion. Now I got to check the URL to make sure. Yeah. Like, where is this being posted?
So I did this the other day.
Like Papa John's, I saw today, it's like Papa John says that he doesn't want Nazis to buy my pizza. And I was just like, 4 years ago, that's an Onion headline. Yeah.
Today,
that's an
like
actual
a real
headline.
Story. That's an actual story, right? Like who thought you would have to make that declaration, right? So it's a weird world we live in.
Right.
But like bottom line, Ajit Pai sucks. Local news is about to get screwed. And like the internet. So we've talked about it before. Net neutrality. Let's say that he does go through with repealing the current rules that are in place. It doesn't mean we're up shit's creek necessarily. Like, one, it takes a little while for the companies to ramp up and actually start any bad practices. But two, we have the courts as a recourse with there, which you've gone over with the rulemaking process a couple of times.
Yeah, basically, if there's something called the Administrative Policy Act, I think it is. I'd
Something
have to look
like
it up.
that.
But it's basically the regulatory body has to act as a body, and it shouldn't just arbitrarily change rules when the head of the body changes.
Right. And
there needs to be some type of justification.
There's also like a thing in there that cites that it has to be in the public interest.
It has to be. It can't be the whole test. The litmus test is it can't be arbitrary or capricious.
Okay,
is kind of what it falls under. The other thing, that's policy review, where it comes under the public good for FCC, and that's just FCC. It's like basically when they enact policy, like the public good is one of the
factors.
That it should adhere to.
So I guess like the thing I'm saying is like there is really not a damn thing we can do about the FCC screwing up local news markets.
Not at this point.
Other than eventual court challenges.
Court challenges could work out.
You can always call your congressman. That never hurts.
Right. But here's the thing, though. The thing that really is, because we talked about like the implications of, because it's kind of a double-edged sword here for cord cutters, because there is a bit of a silver lining in that you might get some local channels over streaming now because bigger companies are going to buy them. But I don't really think it's worth.
It's not going to be local news.
It's not going to be local news. I don't think it's really worth it. And then there's also the fear of, if you have somebody with deep pockets, they can go ahead and buy a bunch of they could go and buy 100% coverage and basically feed us all propaganda if they like and call it news.
Yeah.
And there's really not going to be a lot stopping them.
There's a lot of signs that they're going to be doing that.
And you might think this is tinfoil hat Dennis talking here. But you know what? Sinclair Broadcasting, for example, this is actually what they do. They have these things called must runs. And I've seen them on, and you can go look this up on YouTube. I'll actually play one for you in a second. Sometimes they'll treat, like the local news anchor will talk to the person doing the must run. Like it's an actual kind of back and forth, or they'll always kind of refer to the must run as like their whatever expert that they're talking about, like their political expert in Washington or blah, blah, blah. And it'll go to this thing. And really it's just built at the central Sinclair location.
Yeah. And they're forced to run it.
And I'll play one for you right now. It's basically, do you remember the voter fraud thing that went all kind of like, basically Trump sent a bunch of, he put a commission together for voter fraud to basically catch it. He wanted a whole bunch of state voting record data. Yep. And a lot of states, Republican states even, like said no, because it's
a privacy issue.
It is a privacy issue. You don't want a political, like a national political party to have all of that data.
No,
that's like
It's terrifying.
And to the point where like the Republican governors are like, or the who runs that, the
electoral board.
Yeah. Or like, no, that's not going to happen.
No.
And the whole thing with the voter fraud
only
stuff,
like 2 states complied.
Yeah,
something.
well, it's a sham too, because there's plenty of studies out there. Every time you read one of these voter fraud stories, one, it's always anecdotal. It's never like based on any real data.
Have a remarkably low level of voter fraud.
There are a ton of studies right here that like basically tell you that while you might be able to handpick like a dozen, or so instances, the instances of voter fraud here, I'll pull up the percentage. Actually, it's one study, 2016 working paper concluded that the upper limit on double voting in the 2012 election was 0.02%.
Yeah.
Which is way outside of any, national election that we've had. I don't know how you could
actually design.
The paper also the paper noted that the incident rate was likely much lower, given that the audits conducted by the researchers showed that many, if not all, of these apparent double voters could have been a result of measurement error. Like they were all within the margin of error
of the study.
Yep. A 2014 paper concluded that the likely percent of non-citizen voters in recent U.S. elections is 0.
Yeah.
A nationwide study found in 2014 also found that no evidence of widespread impersonation fraud in the 2012 election. It goes on and on and on. A 2012 study exhaustively pulled records from every state for the alleged election fraud and found overall fraud rate to be infinitesimal. And impersonation fraud by voters at the polls to be the rarest fraud of all. Only 10 cases alleged in 12 years. The same study found that only 56 alleged cases of non-citizen voting in 12 years. Now that's in 12 years, 56 cases out of how many votes are cast in a year?
Okay, here's a rant. 110 million,
and that's just the presidential election.
Yeah, the presidential elections.
You're talking about
if you counted all the local elections. I don't know.
Yeah, and the courts agree on this too. The courts are like, it's non-existent. It's not a real thing.
Okay,
so let me on that. The reason why I'm going into this is this. Here is what Boris Epstein of one of these must runs on Sinclair. I'm just going to run it for you right now.
Do it.
It is important to note that voter fraud goes beyond stealing or miscounting ballots. Intentionally improper voter registration is absolutely a type of voter fraud. The Commission on Election Integrity has gotten to work, and one of its first public actions is drawing scrutiny. The Commission sent a letter to all 50 states requesting publicly available voter roll data to verify any voter fraud that may have occurred. The requested voter information includes voters' full name, address, date of birth, political affiliation, voting history since 2006, military service status, criminal record, and part of the voter's social security number. Dozens of states, both red and blue, have pushed back. These states said that they either cannot or will not provide all of the information requested. For many states opposing the request, they indicate it would be against their own laws to comply. The president responded to those concerns over the weekend by simply asking, what are they trying to hide? The Commission has made it clear that the requested information should be provided only if it is publicly available under the state's laws. The extent of voter fraud in our elections has been hotly debated between the left and the right. The President's Commission has been established to come up with a factual, impartial answer to that question. The state should do everything within their power to cooperate with the Commission. And that's the bottom line.
All right, so that's Boris Epstein. And I think he was introduced in that piece as kind of like their, Washington expert. And it really didn't come across that it was like an editorial.
Yeah. Like, so what really bothers me is that is okay.
And there's tons of those. Like,
yeah, I know.
There's that's just voter fraud. There's like it's really anything that is kind of in question with Trump,
It's
they'll
state
do a
propaganda.
piece. They'll do, yeah, it's exactly what it
Right?
is.
Like, we don't. I hesitate to use this as an example, but I'll use this. We don't live in Russia.
Right.
We should not have propaganda news outlets.
Yeah. From Boris.
And that's, jeez. Maybe that's a little too on the nose. But, yeah.
Like,
I mean,
Yakov Smirnov, in Soviet Union, we have 2 channels. First channel is propaganda. Second channel is man telling you to go back to first channel. And Ajit Pai has set us up perfectly because you can only have 2 channels.
Right. You can only have. You get the first channel and the second channel. No, I mean, like, it's really disturbing. Like, let's set aside the particular issue he was discussing, which is voter fraud, and how ridiculous the idea of, like, there's no evidence of it.
Well, that's why I preempted it. I wanted to preempt a statement just to let you know that it's a completely made up.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It's so infinitesimal that it doesn't even matter.
There's literally no.
There's not enough evidence to even go search for it.
No,
That's
there's
really
no
what the problem
reputable source ever been put out by anyone.
Right. It's like
that says that it is a problem.
Right. It's like going around and sending your police force out and saying, "Go find murders."
Yeah.
Instead of like having them reported to you.
Yeah. It's like the mayor went out and said, "We're overrun with car thieves." And you go around and check and make sure everyone has their proper registration.
Yes. Go out and make sure that no one's being lit on fire by someone right now.
It's insane.
Right.
So, but set that all aside. Like, the fact that this gentleman is
Boris?
Yeah, that fucktard is
allegedly.
Alleged fucktard is going out and making these statements, which are clearly pushing an agenda for the state.
Yeah, it's
should disturb people.
Yeah, and this is Sinclair Broadcast. This is the company that now owns 72%. They have a reach of 72% of households.
Yeah, and all I would say is that the people that are like, I don't see anything wrong with that, should ask themselves,
if you that's the one thing real quick. If you agree with that position that it's okay to do this voter fraud investigation, fine. But
that's a different thing.
But don't pawn it off as like to treat it to have like a because he used to actually, I think he was on Trump's campaign.
Yeah. Don't have
Boris Epstein was on Trump's campaign.
Don't have so if you agree with doing a voter fraud investigation, right? Like, that's one thing, right? Like, and I disagree, but we can politely disagree about that.
Right. That's not the issue.
But like, what we cannot politely disagree about is in the United States of America having propagandists go out there and act as if they're journalists.
Right.
Like, that we cannot politely disagree.
Yeah, and people might out there be like, well, there's Rachel Maddow and there's Hannity, but here's the difference. That happens
They're not state actors.
Well, no, it's not even that. That doesn't happen during your news. That happens during the opinion editorial segments of cable news. It is at night. At night when they're showing those shows where your Hannitys come on,
and I agree with that,
and whatever else. Then they say that it's not news. It's their editorial. This comes on during the news, and it's pushed out from a central location to every affiliate that they have to run it. I'm not affiliate, but every network they own has to run it in the local DMA.
But I think it's even worse than what you're saying there, because I agree with you. I agree with like not disclosing that it's commentary, not disclosing that it's forced content, right, is an inherent problem.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's worse than that. I think that what it is doing is pushing agenda for the state, meaning the federal government.
Right, that's terrible.
And agenda is being pushed by this company.
And it's doubly worse that it's being pawned off during news, like while your news is on.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's unbelievable.
If it was forced broadcasting during any time of the day, regardless of the programming, and it was propaganda, I would object to it out of hand.
Right.
The fact that it's during the news and it's not disclosed that it's propaganda bothers me even more.
Now, okay, so Boris is one issue. They actually have I think Bill O'Reilly was being.
Oh yeah, he's being courted.
He was, but I think it didn't happen.
Oh, did it get scuttled?
But another Gorka, Seb Gorka, who
this guy.
He was with the Trump administration for a while. He got fired.
No one knew what he actually did.
Well, Bannon brought him on. So Bannon brought him in, and he was
He's a grade A lunatic and an actual Nazi.
Okay, well, yeah. To clarify, he is a member of the Order of Vitesse, which is a Hungarian. It's an order of merit founded in 1920, and during World War II, the U.S. State Department said that this organization is under the direction of the Nazi government of Germany. So, and he wears this pin
with pride.
With pride. He also has a license plate. Do you know what his personalized license plate is?
No.
It says Sun Tzu. I'm not kidding, because somebody posted his car in Virginia. He parked on the curb, his two tires were up on the curb.
Of course he did.
I came and took a picture of his car, and I'm not kidding. As he's walking away from it, and his license plate is literally Sun Tzu, the art of war.
So fine, we can split hairs.
He looks like a Bond villain, and he sounds like a Bond villain.
Sounds like a Bond villain.
Which I'll play.
He should be petting a cat.
He really should the whole time. It's ridiculous. Here, let me just play. Let me play this clip.
They are the anomaly. You do not make legislation out of outliers. Our big issue is black African gun crime against black Africans. It is a tragedy. Go to Chicago, go to the cities run by Democrats for 40 years. Black young men are murdering each other by the bushel. This is a social issue. Allow the police to do their jobs and rebuild those societies. Legislation will not save lives.
Okay. For some context there, that was after the tragedy in I think it was after the tragedy in Nevada.
Yeah, the Las Vegas shooting.
Yeah. And he pivoted to why aren't we talking about black Africans? Now, I know quite a few black people, African Americans, if you will.
I've never heard anyone refer to them that way.
I've never heard that phrase. No, because he's talking about African American on African American crime,
and he's specifically trying to allude to Chicago.
Do you know who?
Which is dog whistling.
Yeah, it is. It totally is. And do you know who says black Africans when they're referring to African Americans? Nazis.
Right. Fucking Nazis. You know who he sounds like? He sounds like the bad guy in Lethal Weapon 2.
Oh, Mr. Reeves.
Diplomatic immunity, right?
Yes.
That's what he sounds like. I mean, the guy is a caricature of himself.
It is, and he has a dyed black goatee. I am not
he's
kidding.
Amazing.
It is. I mean, you got to see this guy.
The guy's on Chapo Trap House, which is a fun podcast. Very left leaning, so if you're not into that,
yeah, and gutter left, is what they like to refer.
They are not shy about their political beliefs.
It's a fun
but
podcast.
They are very funny, and they one of the guys on there is a great comedian. We got to see live, and he does an amazing.
Well, he's on there a lot. I don't know if he's actually affiliated with the show, but he shows up often as a guest.
I think he's affiliated.
James Adomian.
I don't think
great
he's
comedian.
one of the core members.
Nah, right. So, but no, he does a great impression of Seb Gorka that we actually got to see live. It was fantastic. But this is a guy who, getting back though, this is a guy that is on Sinclair's payroll to be and I think they always bill him as kind of a foreign affairs. I don't know why he's talking about black Africans in that sketch, but usually he's sketch. It might as well be a sketch.
For lack of a better term.
Yeah, but he's usually billed as kind of their foreign policy. person.
So that's another thing that really irked me. Just in that now, everything about him irks me.
Oh yeah. Well, he's a terrible human being.
Particularly the Nazi piece. But the other piece that really irked me is when he's talking about African Americans and referring to them in the way he does, and then he describes like their society.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like
they're
them.
Americans.
Like they're the them.
They're in our society. This is our society.
Right.
We collectively live in one society in the United States.
Right. And it's
asshole.
He's total asshole. And the thing is like I know what he's doing. He's like you said, it's dog whistle shit where he's talking to people out there who, you know, I guess the word American is too good for black people. So let's just eliminate it. It's kind of what he did right there.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, you know, African American or hell, black. I mean, he said black Africans, like completely disassociating them as Americans.
States. Right.
Like it's terrible.
It's disgusting.
It's insidious.
Yeah.
Because it's not obvious unless you actually kind of sit there and think about it a bit.
But that is
what he actually
registering in some people's minds.
Yeah. And this is the company that now has reached
72%.
Thanks, Ajit Pai.
God, I hate that guy.
Ugh.
Just enabling these people. Such an asshole.
After the show, I am just so depressed that I'm just going to say we'll see you next time. Because I don't even want to pitch. Go subscribe, do the stuff. Leave a review.
I don't know. Do something.
Take it easy, guys.
Take care, everyone. we need to. Take care of each other.
I'm going to go hit the bottle.